Introduction: the people who gave us history. Welcome to ancient Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Here, over 5,000 years ago, a remarkable civilization emerged that would change humanity forever. The Sumerians weren't just the first people to write down their stories. They were the first to have a written history at all. Before we had Egypt's pyramids, before Greece's philosophers, before Rome's legions, there were the Sumerians. And remarkably, when they began scratching symbols into clay tablets around 3400 BCE, they didn't just record kings and wars. They documented everything: shopping lists, love poems, medical prescriptions, complaints about bad copper deliveries, and even homework assignments from the world's first schools. Today, we're going to explore their world through their own eyes, through the very records they left behind. This is history told by history's first historians. Part 1. The land between two rivers. Imagine standing in southern Mesopotamia around 4500 BCE. You're in what we now call Iraq, but the landscape would be almost unrecognizable. The land is flat, stretching endlessly toward horizons broken only by reed marshes and occasional palm groves. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers snake through the terrain, bringing life-giving water, but also devastating floods. This is where the Sumerians built their civilization, though we're still not entirely sure where they came from originally. Their language was unlike any other in the region, not Semitic like their neighbors, but something entirely unique. Some scholars believe they migrated from the mountains to the east. Others think they may have always been there. The Sumerians themselves simply called their land Kian-Gur, which means the land of the civilized lords. The challenge they faced was immense. This wasn't the fertile Nile Valley with predictable floods and rich soil. Mesopotamia was harsh and unpredictable. The rivers could flood violently in spring, destroying everything, then run dry in summer. There were no forests for timber, no stone for building, and no metals for tools. But here's where Sumerian ingenuity began to shine. They looked at this seemingly impossible landscape and asked, how can we make this work? The answer would reshape human civilization. Part 2. Building cities in the desert. The Sumerians didn't just build villages, they built the world's first true cities. Places like Uruk, Eridu, Lagash, and Nippur weren't small farming communities. By 2900 BCE, Uruk had a population of perhaps 50,000 to 80,000 people, larger than any settlement that had existed before. To create these cities, they had to master water. They dug canals, built irrigation systems, and created a network of waterways that turned the desert into farmland. This wasn't simple work. It required organization, cooperation, and planning on a scale never before attempted. Someone had to design the canals. Someone had to organize the labor. Someone had to maintain the systems and resolve disputes when one farmer's irrigation affected another's fields. This need for organization gave birth to bureaucracy, and bureaucracy needed record-keeping. That need ultimately gave us writing. But let's talk about what these cities actually looked like. Unlike later civilizations that built with stone, the Sumerians built with mud. They took clay from the riverbanks, mixed it with water and straw, formed it into bricks, and dried them in the scorching Mesopotamian sun. These sun-dried bricks, called adobe, became their primary building material. The result was cities that gleamed white under the desert sun. Narrow streets wound between high-walled houses. The houses themselves turned inward, with blank walls facing the street, but opening onto central courtyards where families lived much of their lives. This design wasn't just aesthetic. It kept homes cool in the brutal summer heat and provided privacy in crowded urban spaces. Rising above everything were the ziggurats, massive stepped pyramids that served as temples. The most famous was the Great Ziggurat of Ur, dedicated to the moon god Nana. These weren't tombs like Egypt's pyramids. They were artificial mountains, stairways to heaven where priests could commune with the gods. The ziggurat at Ur stood about 100 feet tall and was visible for miles across the flat landscape. Here's a fun fact. The Sumerians invented the brick mold, which allowed them to produce standardized bricks by the thousands. Before this, each brick had to be shaped by hand. This single innovation made large-scale architecture possible and may seem simple, but it was revolutionary. Part 3. The Miracle of Writing. Around 3400 BCE, something extraordinary happened in Uruk. Someone pressed a reed stylus into a clay tablet and created marks that represented not just pictures, but ideas and sounds. This was the birth of cuneiform writing, and with it, the birth of recorded history. The word cuneiform comes from the Latin cuneus, meaning wedge, because of the wedge-shaped marks made by the reed stylus. At first, the writing was pictographic. A drawing of a head meant head. A drawing of a bowl meant bowl. But the system quickly evolved. Pictures became simplified, abstract. They began to represent sounds and ideas, not just objects. Why did they develop writing? The answer is delightfully mundane: accounting. The earliest tablets we've found aren't great literature or historical chronicles, they're receipts. 5 sheep received from Cushem. Barley, 29,086 measures. The earliest positively named person in history is probably Cushem, and we don't know if Cushem was a man, a woman, or even a single person, just that someone by that name was involved in barley transactions around 3400 BCE. But once the technology existed, the Sumerians used it for everything. They wrote business contracts detailing loans, sales, and partnerships, legal codes establishing laws and punishments, predating Hammurabi's famous code. Mathematical tablets showing they used a sexagesimal base 60 system, which is why we have 60 seconds in a minute and 360 degrees in a circle. Astronomical observations tracking the movements of planets and stars, medical texts describing symptoms, diagnoses, and treatments. Literature, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, humanity's oldest surviving work of literature. Love poems, including some quite steamy verses that would make modern romance novels blush. Proverbs like, "The fox has made a vow. I don't steal." But then he immediately steals something. School exercises showing students practicing their letters and dealing with angry teachers. One of my favorite Sumerian tablets is a complaint letter. A merchant named Nani wrote to Eanasir around 1750 BCE, complaining that the copper he received was of poor quality and that Eanasir had treated his servant rudely. The tablet has survived nearly 4,000 years, and Eanasir appears to have been such a notorious dealer in substandard copper that multiple complaint tablets about him have been found. Even in ancient Sumer, some merchants had terrible reputations. Part 4. Daily life in ancient Sumer. Let's step into a typical day in ancient Uruk, around 2500 BCE. You wake before dawn, most people do, to avoid the worst of the day's heat. Your house is built around a central courtyard, with rooms opening onto this space. There are no windows facing the street, just high walls for privacy and protection. Your bed is simply a mud brick platform covered with reed mats and blankets. If you're wealthy, you might have a wooden bed frame, timber being a luxury item that had to be imported from distant lands. You sleep on the roof during hot summer nights, along with much of the family. For breakfast, you might have barley bread and beer. Yes, beer for breakfast. The Sumerians were passionate brewers, and beer was safer to drink than water and more nutritious than we might think. They had multiple types of beer: dark beer, pale beer, red beer, and even a special beer drunk through straws to avoid the grain sediments. Women typically brewed the beer, and the goddess Ninkasi, was the divine protector of brewers. We even have a hymn to Ninkasi that doubles as a beer recipe. Here's a wonderful detail. Sumerian workers were often paid in beer rations. A laborer might receive about 2 liters per day, while administrators and officials received more. Beer wasn't just a beverage, it was currency, nutrition, and social lubricant all in one. If you're a farmer, you head to the fields early. Sumerian agriculture was sophisticated. They grew barley, wheat, dates, figs, and vegetables. They raised sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs. They understood crop rotation and fertilization. They even had specialized plows. The seed drill plow, which planted seeds as it tilled, was a Sumerian invention. If you're a craftsperson, you might be a potter, weaver, smith, carpenter, or jeweler. Sumerian cities had distinct craft quarters where specialists worked. Potters created everything from simple storage jars to fine decorated vessels. Weavers produced wool textiles that were exported throughout the ancient world. Sumerian textiles were highly prized trade goods. Women in Sumer had more rights than in many later civilizations. They could own property, run businesses, and serve as priestesses. Some became quite powerful. The position of Entu, high priestess, was one of the highest religious offices, often filled by royal daughters. Women could also be scribes, though this was less common. They could divorce under certain circumstances and retained rights to their dowries. Education existed, but only for the elite. Boys, and occasionally girls, attended a dubba, literally tablet house or school. Here they spent years learning the complex cuneiform system. We have school tablets showing students exercises and even texts describing harsh teachers who beat students for poor work or inattention. One text has a student complaining that his teacher caned him multiple times in a single day. Education was rigorous and physical. The school day was long and focused heavily on memorization and copying. Students copied out word lists, practiced writing, learned mathematics, and studied literature. Advanced students learned surveying, law, and administration. Becoming a scribe meant joining the elite. Scribes were administrators, priests, merchants, and advisors to kings. Part 5: Gods, Temples, and the Cosmos. Religion permeated every aspect of Sumerian life. The Sumerians believed the gods had created humans for a specific purpose: to serve them. This wasn't as grim as it sounds. Essentially, humans were to maintain the temples, make offerings, and perform rituals so the gods could enjoy existence without worrying about mundane matters. The Sumerian pantheon was vast and complex. At the top was Enor-Anu, the sky god, and his consort Ki-Earth. Their children included Enlil, god of wind, air, and storms, the king of the gods Enki, or Ea, god of water, wisdom, and crafts, the clever god who helped humanity in Anna, later Ishtar, goddess of love, war, and fertility, passionate, dangerous, and beloved Nana, or Sin, the moon god Utu, or Shamash, the sun god and god of justice. Each city had its patron deity. Uruk belonged to An and Inanna. Uar was protected by Nana. Eridu was Enki's city. Nippur, home to Enlil's great temple, was the religious center of all Sumer. The temples weren't just places of worship, they were economic powerhouses. Temple complexes owned vast lands, employed hundreds of workers, and functioned as banks, warehouses, and redistribution centers. The priests didn't just pray, they managed the economy, allocated resources, and wielded enormous political power. Religious festivals punctuated the year. The sacred marriage ceremony, celebrating the union of the king with Inanna, or her high priestess, was meant to ensure the land's fertility. The New Year festival involved processions, feasts, and rituals to guarantee the gods' continued favor. Here's something remarkable. The Sumerians believed they could communicate with the gods through omens. They examined sheep livers, observed the flight of birds, interpreted dreams, and watched astronomical phenomena. They developed elaborate systems of divination, believing the gods left signs in the natural world. This wasn't primitive superstition. It was a sophisticated attempt to understand and predict events in an uncertain world. The Sumerian view of the afterlife was rather gloomy. The dead went to the land of no return, a dark realm beneath the earth ruled by the goddess Ereshkigal. Unlike Egypt with its promise of eternal paradise, the Sumerian afterlife was a shadowy existence where spirits ate dust and clay. This made life all the more precious. You had to make the most of your time in the sunlit world. Part 6: Kings, Wars, and Politics. Sumerian political organization evolved over centuries. Early on, cities were governed by councils of elders and assemblies of free men, with a lugal, big man, chosen as military leader during emergencies. Over time, these lugals became permanent kings, though Sumerian kingship always retained something of its original temporary nature. Kings had to prove their worth through military success and just rule. The Sumerians never created a unified empire the way later civilizations did. Instead, Sumer was a collection of city-states, each fiercely independent and often at war with one another. Uruk fought Uar. Lagash battled Umma over irrigation rights and border disputes. These conflicts were intense but usually limited in scope, more about honor, resources, and regional dominance than total conquest. One of the earliest known wars was fought between Lagash and Umma around 2450 BCE over a border dispute. We know about this because of the Stele of the Vultures, a stone monument depicting the victory of Lagash's king Eannatum. The stele shows heaps of enemy dead being devoured by vultures, not subtle, but effective propaganda. Warfare was serious business. Sumerian armies consisted of infantry armed with spears, axes, and large rectangular shields. They wore leather armor and copper helmets. Elite troops used battle axes and were trained in formation fighting. The famous Sumerian phalanx involved soldiers forming a shield wall and advancing together, an early version of tactics that would dominate ancient warfare. Here's an interesting innovation. The Sumerians probably invented the chariot. Early depictions show four-wheeled vehicles drawn by donkeys. Horses hadn't reached Mesopotamia yet, carrying soldiers into battle. These weren't the swift, two-wheeled chariots of later civilizations, but they represented a revolutionary development in military technology. Kings didn't just make war. They were expected to dig canals, build temples, ensure justice, and maintain prosperity. The concept of the just king was deeply embedded in Sumerian culture. Kings who failed their duties could be abandoned by their gods and their people. One of the most fascinating aspects of Sumerian politics was the Sumerian king list, a document that attempts to list every king who had ruled Sumer from the beginning of time. It starts with the kings before the flood, who allegedly ruled for tens of thousands of years each. After the flood, lifespans become more reasonable, though still impressive. The list mixes mythology and history in ways that make it both frustrating and fascinating for modern historians. Part 7: Innovation and Legacy. Let's talk about what the Sumerians gave us, because their innovations shaped civilization itself. The wheel. The earliest evidence of the wheel comes from Sumer around 3500 BCE. Initially used for pottery, it was soon adapted for transportation. The potter's wheel allowed for symmetrical, thin-walled vessels that couldn't be made by hand. The wheeled vehicle revolutionized transport and trade. Mathematics. The Sumerians developed a sophisticated mathematical system based on 60 sexagesimal. This system was ideal for astronomy and calculations because 60 is divisible by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30, much more flexible than our decimal system. We still use base, 60, for measuring time and angles. They understood geometry, could calculate areas and volumes, and even tackled problems we'd recognize as early algebra. Astronomy. Sumerian priests were keen observers of the night sky. They tracked the movements of planets, which they identified with gods, predicted eclipses, and developed calendars. Their astronomical observations laid the groundwork for Babylonian astronomy, which in turn influenced Greek, Islamic, and eventually modern astronomy. Law. The Sumerians created some of history's earliest law codes. The Code of Uar-Nammu, dating to around 2100 BCE, is older than Hammurabi's famous code by about 300 years. It established the principle that crimes should be punished with fines rather than physical retribution, surprisingly progressive for its time. If a man commits a murder, that man must be killed is straightforward, but if a man knocks out the eye of another man, he shall weigh out half a mina of silver, suggests a society trying to replace blood feuds with legal compensation. Literature. The Epic of Gilgamesh, pieced together from multiple Sumerian sources, is humanity's oldest surviving work of literature. It tells the story of Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, and his friendship with the wild man Enkidu, their adventures together, and Gilgamesh's quest for immortality after Enkidu's death. It's a profound meditation on mortality, friendship, and what it means to be human, and it was ancient when Homer was young. Urban planning. Sumerian cities had drainage systems, organized street layouts, and designated areas for different activities. They understood sanitation and tried to manage waste in increasingly crowded urban environments. Agriculture. Innovations like the seed drill plow, systematic irrigation, and crop rotation increased food production dramatically, making cities possible in the first place. Bureaucracy. For better or worse, the Sumerians invented institutional organization. Their temple and palace administrations developed hierarchies, specialization, and record-keeping that became models for all subsequent civilizations. Part 8. Art, Music, and Beauty. The Sumerians weren't all practicality and bureaucracy. They loved beauty, music, and art. Sumerian art was stylized but expressive. Their statues show people with enormous eyes being the windows to the soul, often in attitudes of prayer. These statues were placed in temples as eternal worshippers, praying on behalf of their donors. The Royal Standard of Uar, a decorated box found in the royal cemetery, shows scenes of war and peace in intricate mosaic made from shell, lapis lazuli, and red limestone. It's one of the earliest examples of narrative art, telling stories through images. Jewelry was exquisite. The royal tombs of Uar yielded golden headdresses, necklaces of carnelian and lapis lazuli, and intricate metalwork that rivals anything produced in later ages. Lapis lazuli, a deep blue stone, had to be imported from Afghanistan. The existence of such trade goods shows Sumerian reach extended far beyond Mesopotamia. Music played a major role in Sumerian life. We have representations of lyres, harps, drums, and reed pipes. The lyres of Uar, found in the royal cemetery, are beautiful instruments decorated with bulls' heads. Music accompanied religious ceremonies, royal banquets, and probably daily life. We even have what might be the world's oldest notated music, a hymn written in cuneiform that includes musical notation, though interpreting it remains controversial. Sumerian love poetry was passionate and direct. Here's a fragment from a love poem addressed to a king, possibly Shusen of Uar. Bridegroom, dear to my heart, goodly is your beauty, honey sweet lion, dear to my heart, goodly is your beauty, honey sweet. Another poem celebrates physical love with remarkable frankness, describing the joys of marriage and intimacy. The Sumerians weren't prudish about sexuality. Inanna, the goddess of love, had numerous lovers and wasn't ashamed of her desires. Sacred prostitution was practiced at some temples, seen as a form of worship rather than something shameful. Part 9. The End of an Era. Around 2000 BCE, Sumerian civilization began to fade. This wasn't a sudden collapse, but a gradual transformation. Semitic peoples, particularly the Akkadians and later the Amorites, had been migrating into southern Mesopotamia for centuries, adopting Sumerian culture while bringing their own languages and traditions. King Sargon of Akkad conquered much of Sumer around 2334 BCE, creating what some call the world's first empire. Though the Sumerians regained independence temporarily under the Third Dynasty of Ur, around 2100 to 2000 BCE, this was their last hurrah as a politically independent people. By 1800 BCE, Sumerian had ceased to be spoken as a living language. It survived only as a scholarly and religious language, much like Latin in medieval Europe. Babylon rose to dominance, and though Babylonian culture was built directly on Sumerian foundations, the Sumerians themselves had vanished into history. What happened? Several factors combined. Salinization. Centuries of irrigation without adequate drainage caused salt to accumulate in the soil, reducing agricultural productivity. Migration and conquest. Repeated invasions by various peoples. Climate change. Possible shifts in rainfall patterns affecting agriculture. Political fragmentation. Constant wars between city-states weakened them. All. Cultural assimilation. Sumerians intermarried with and were absorbed by other peoples. But in another sense, the Sumerians never truly disappeared. Their writing system was adopted by the Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and many other peoples, remaining in use until about 100 CE, over 3,000 years. Their religious ideas spread throughout the ancient Near East. Their myths influenced the Hebrew Bible and other later traditions. Their mathematical and astronomical knowledge passed to the Greeks and eventually to us. Part 10. Rediscovery and Legacy. For over 2,000 years, the Sumerians were completely forgotten. Their cities lay buried under a rocky sand. Their language was unknown. Their very existence was unsuspected. Then, in the 19th century, archaeologists began excavating Mesopotamian sites. At first, they found Assyrian and Babylonian remains. But as they dug deeper, they found something older, texts in a language that wasn't Semitic, wasn't like anything known. Scholars struggled for decades to decipher cuneiform and recognize that there had been an earlier civilization beneath Babylon and Assyria. The breakthrough came gradually. By comparing bilingual inscriptions and painstakingly analyzing thousands of tablets, scholars slowly unlocked Sumerian. Archaeologists like Leonard Woolley excavated Ur in the 1920s and 30s, revealing the royal tombs and the Great Ziggurat. Each season brought new discoveries, tablets by the thousands, revealing the intimate details of ancient life. Today we can read Sumerian almost as fluently as ancient Akkadian, though debates continue about grammar and vocabulary. We've recovered tens of thousands of tablets. We understand their religion, their politics, their economy, their literature. Museums worldwide display Sumerian artifacts. The British Museum, the Louvre, the University of Pennsylvania Museum, and the Iraq Museum all have extensive collections. But here's something that should humble us. We've probably recovered only a tiny fraction of what existed. Clay tablets are durable, but many have been lost. Entire cities remain unexcavated. And tablets that recorded perishable materials, the thousands of books written on papyrus or leather, the songs passed down orally, the paintings on palace walls, all of that is gone forever. Conclusion. Speaking across the millennia. What can the Sumerians teach us today, across a gulf of 5,000 years? First, that civilization is a choice, an audacious human project. The Sumerians faced a harsh environment with no natural advantages, Yet they chose to build cities, to organize society, to create beauty, to pursue knowledge. They looked at the blank clay tablet and decided to fill it with meaning. Second, that the concerns of ancient people weren't so different from ours. They worried about money, complained about poor service, fell in love, mourned their dead, laughed at jokes, and tried to make sense of an uncertain world. Reading Sumerian tablets, you encounter not alien beings, but recognizable humans. Third, that innovation compounds. The Sumerians invented writing to track grain deliveries, but once the technology existed, it could be used for everything: law, literature, science, love letters. Each innovation opened new possibilities. Each solution created new problems that required new solutions. Fourth, that nothing is permanent. The great cities of Sumer, which seemed eternal to their inhabitants, are dust. Their power passed. Their language died. Yet something survived: their ideas, their innovations, their stories. We still divide our hours into 60 minutes, our circles into 360 degrees. We still read the Epic of Gilgamesh and recognize its truths. We still use writing, the Sumerian gift to all subsequent humanity. When you write something down, when you check the time, when you read a story, you're participating in traditions the Sumerians began. They were the first, and in a very real sense, we are their heirs. The last cuneiform tablet was written around 75 CE, probably by a priest in Babylon still maintaining ancient traditions. With that tablet, a writing system that had lasted over 3 millennia finally died. But the Sumerians' greatest creation, the idea that human thoughts and experiences could be preserved beyond a single lifetime, that knowledge could accumulate across generations, that we could speak to the future, that lives on. Every time you read these words, you're engaging in an activity the Sumerians made possible. Across 5,000 years, they're still speaking to us, and we can still hear them. They taught us to write our stories. This is part of theirs.